and welcome to Okashikon Online presents Japan Stories. If you are new here, welcome. We really appreciate you. Okashikon is a nonprofit in Central Texas. We feature Japan pop culture in general, with a heavy emphasis on anime, gaming, and Japanese fashion, and particularly women in those industries. Here at Okashikon Online, we actually branch out even further. So we have shows about Japanese travel and culture, such as Japan Stories that you're watching right now. We have a show on Japan craft, arts and crafts that I host on the second Monday of every month called Make Your Monday. And we also have a show that is on Japan gaming in general. So that is the Demo Disc Okashikon show. And right now it is every Sunday night. So if you are more familiar to Twitch and you're looking for game content, every Sunday night, the Demo Disc Okashikon guys will be coming live at you playing Monster Hunter right now. And tonight is the host CW's birthday. So please join them tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time, for a very hunty birth night celebrating CW's birthday. Again, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions about what Okashikon is, please feel free to ask at any time. I am on the chat as Kintsugi Style, and we also have Okashikon moderators standing by. Let me introduce myself to you. My name is Julianne. I'm also known on Twitch and Twitter as Kintsugi Style. You may see me commenting the chat throughout the day. I'm also known on Instagram as Julianne in Japan, although honestly, at the moment, not in Japan right now because of the pandemic, but certainly come 2023, I will be back again. 2022, I will be back again. In 2023, I will be a part-time resident. So I have been many times to Japan for extended periods. I've spent several months of my life there, and that is why I currently run a show. Now, we have some other special events that are coming up. So normally we have those 3 shows every month, and sometimes we also have anime afternoons. But because we were unable to have Okashikon live in person, so it's normally a 3-day convention on anime, gaming, and Japanese fashion, because of COVID, we decided it's not quite safe enough yet to have a large indoor convention. And so we are having an online 1-day festival, which is going to be called the Okashikon Summer Festival Celebrating Japan. And that is going to be right here on Twitch on the 17th of July. So please mark your calendars. It's going to be afternoon into evening and about 7 or 8 hours of guests who are either showing us slides live in Japan. We have Zach, who's going to be coming back to us. I think we might have Tokyo Drew coming as well. So we will have plenty of live guests showing us exciting places in Japan, so you can get a little bit of that virtual tour experience. But also we will have people who were in the United States who have some kind of connection to Japan. So we will be bringing you some stores that are in the Central Texas area. We have authors who write books that are based in Japan or that are specifically guidebooks to Japan. And so we have a wide assortment of Japanese themed activities that we'll be bringing you that day so that you can have a little bit of that experience. Unfortunately, none of us are able to travel to the Olympics in 2021, but we will be celebrating as if we were about to have a wonderful Japanese experience. So please, I invite you to go ahead and hit subscribe on Twitch if you are new to us. Hitting the little subscribe button actually just gives you notifications every time that we go live. As I said, we are a nonprofit and we really do appreciate your time and attention. If you are watching us on the replays on YouTube, we also encourage you to hit subscribe there because we do have programs that come out several times every month. And then also, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, we have a monthly mailing list to tell you which shows are coming up. So as I said, it's a little bit pared back for the month of June. We are going to have Make Your Monday and Dimidos Okashikon, but we will not be having this show, Japan Stories, because we have this very big event coming up in July. But normally Japan Stories is a show that I host every month on the 4th Sunday of the month here at 2 p.m. Central Time, Central United States Time, not Central European or Central Australian. And so 2 p.m. Central Time. I host some kind of travel program about going to Japan, and it could be either my experiences or I have a guest, and we talk about all kinds of things. We've talked about specific museums that I've gone to, shopping tours, individual locations that we've highlighted. I really can't remember all the things that we have highlighted and focused on so far. Last month, we had a wonderful program featuring Josh Grisdale of Accessible Japan on touring Japan with disabilities. So all of our previous programs are available on the Akashicon online website. You can go back and watch them at any time. And that does have the full show notes included. So any links that were mentioned are available on our website. And we recommend that you start there first. If you are on YouTube, you can find them, but we do need to update those show notes a little bit to put the links in there. Speaking of show notes, I would like to say that we do have a very special guest today, and that is Rob Dyer. But unfortunately, he was not able to be here live in person today because of a scheduling conflict that came up fairly last minute. But I do have an interview with Rob, and we do have that we were able to present to you. Now, Rob does have a few books out, and I personally own all of them, and I can recommend them to you. I promise this is not a show that is just pushing random merchandise at you. Everything that we talk about here is something that I personally really believe in and believe will be very beneficial for you planning your trip to Japan or while you are in Japan. And as part of that, we will be mentioning Rob's books and where to find them, but Rob has very generously offered us affiliate links. So this is the Federal Trade Commission's required disclaimer saying that in our show notes, after the show, we will have the links to the books where you can purchase them, and a small portion of that sales price will go to keeping Akashicon online. We do have some costs associated with bringing you these broadcasts, although we do try to keep the expense to you to nothing. But it's very helpful to us if you can use our affiliate links so that we can help support the software that we use to bring these shows to you. Also, again, if you are an Amazon Prime member and you don't already subscribe to a Twitch channel, please think about dropping your free Twitch subscription. Now, I'm using the subscription in the other term. Twitch confusingly uses it both ways. If this is a paid subscription, that means that the commercials that you may get during this live broadcast will be canceled for you. And again, if you're an Amazon Prime member and you do not already subscribe to a Twitch channel, this is completely free for you. So you would go ahead and go onto, unfortunately can't do it in the mobile app, but if you use on the desktop program, you can go into subscribe and it'll say use free Twitch Prime, Amazon Prime account, and commercials will be completely gone from your feed. So if you do not already have a Twitch account, we would encourage you to get one. The Twitch account by itself is free, and that is what's required to make comments during the live broadcast. So again, I did say today this is primarily a pre-recorded broadcast, but I will be available during the chat the entire time. I keep pointing over here because that is where I have the chat window on my screen. I will be able to answer your questions live, or certainly I can also, if you have things that maybe need further explanation, after the interview with Rob has finished, I will come back online and I will be able to answer your questions to the best of my ability or point you at resources that I know. This is something that we do every single month here on Japan Stories, because I know that sometimes traveling to Japan, especially the first time, can be very intimidating. And that is why I had Rob come on here, because Rob has some books that are very helpful. His 2 books are about traveling in Japan if you don't speak Japanese. His second book is about planning your trip to Japan. So it's different than all the other things that are out there in the market. And then Rob also has travel planning services, which is not the same as a tour agent. He's really just sort of giving you the benefit of his experience and saying, have you thought about this? Or maybe you wanted to do this other thing. We did cut a lot of that other interview for the sake of time, but that is something that I have taken advantage of myself. So again, these are opportunities that I would like to bring to you, resources that I think that are very valuable, especially if you get very inspired by the upcoming Olympics and you decide that you want to go to Japan for the first time, but you just need a little bit of hand holding. So I hope that has given you a thorough introduction of what we're doing today, and we can go ahead and get into that interview with Rob. It's going to be a fairly extensive interview. There were things that were cut out, so if you hear any strange little glitches, like as we said before, that's just because I value your time and I don't want to spend too much time. We did record for about 2.5 hours, and I know that you guys don't have 2.5 hours to spend with us this afternoon. So I really appreciate you. Let's get into the video, and remember, anytime you have questions, pop them into the chat, and I will be happy to communicate with you here in the Twitch chat while the interview is rolling, or I will answer your questions on screen afterwards. So thank you very much. Let's start that video.
Hi, Rob. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Julianne. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So let's start back at the beginning. We're going to assume that nobody knows anything about you, and tell us who you are and what it is that you do at therealjapan.com.
Sure. Okay, so my name's Rob Dyer. I run a website called The Real Japan, which is at therealjapan.com. And basically, the website is a guide to traveling in Japan, and it's trying to encourage people to go a little bit off the beaten track. So it kind of structures all the content into three main areas, which is kind of dreaming about your trip. So, you know, all the inspiration phase, if you like. Then the kind of the nitty gritty of planning, which is a huge subject in its own area, but all the steps that get involved in planning and pre-planning the trip before you go. And then thinking about the exact things that you want to do and experience once you're there. So that kind of is a segue from planning, but some of the specifics in terms of, you know, the kind of activities you want to do, specific sites you want to see, places you want to go, and so on. So yeah, it started just as a kind of a hobby blog in 2015. And I started it really because I've been blogging about music for about 10 years prior to that. So I had quite a bit of experience of blogging in general. But my wife's Japanese, and I first went to Japan in the year 2000. And friends of ours knew that we were going on a regular basis, a few times a year. And so they just kept asking us questions about, oh, you know, how do you do this? What's it like there? What about the language? Is that a big problem? And all these kind of questions. And I just thought I'd just kind of put all the basic answers to those basic questions into a blog and just kind of start to curate that. So that's what I did. That's how it started out originally.
I can say with complete honesty that you have some very unique articles on there that you will not find anywhere else on the internet. So some people may be wondering, well, aren't there, you know, hundreds of blogs about people in Japan? There are, but your blog has some very unique things, especially about how to travel with language issues. Can you tell us about that first? Because I think that is really what people need, whether they know it or not. They need your
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I first approached this topic because it was one of the ones, well, it was the question I was getting asked the most. When people were coming to the website, when they were emailing me for questions, they were just contacting me out the blue through the website, or they were searching on the website, and they were looking all the time, not all the time, but the one they were thing they were searching for the most was about reassurance, really, about traveling in Japan when you don't speak the language. And I felt uniquely qualified for this because because despite having been married to a Japanese wife for 20 years, I still don't speak the language fluently. So I get by with survival, what I call survival Japanese, which is I can travel on my own and just get by day to day, but I can't have a detailed conversation. I can't read much kanji and so on. But the point there is that I can do this, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's not something I'm proud of necessarily, but I'm just saying to people, look, I'm a practical example of how you can do this, even with the best will in the world. You know, learn some basics, get your guidebooks, get some phrase books. That's what I always do, and I always encourage others to do. But don't be so put off by it. I mean, I can't tell you, I get emails every year, every quarter from people that are saying, hi, Rob, just wanted to get in touch. I'm looking at your website. I'm planning a trip to Japan. And they go on and say a variation of the following, which is, but I'm not going for 12 months because I'm having Japanese lessons before I go. Now, there's no harm. Obviously, there's nothing wrong in wanting to learn the Japanese, to get under the skin of the country and get to know the people better, and all those sorts of benefits that come from that, you know, that better cultural understanding by speaking any language when you go to a foreign country. But people often use that as a kind of a bit of a comfort blanket, a bit of a barrier. But often it's, and this is when people are coming to Japan for the first time, and they may not be Japanophiles like a lot of your audience are, but they're thinking about Japan, or it's suddenly popped up on their radar, and then it is still a very alien country to Westerners. So there is a big cultural shift and a big potential cultural shock. But what I try to say to people is, don't be overly anxious. That's really the kind of underlying message. So I started to write an article on the website about, which was along the lines of how to travel in Japan when you don't speak the language or without speaking Japanese. And it wasn't advocating don't speak Japanese. It was really like, here are some practical tips and some reassurances just from experience, really, of what it is like when you don't speak the language. And so I put that out there. And then that developed into my first book a couple of years ago, which had the same title. And that sold really well. So I could see that it was a sort of a popular topic, and it's kind of one of those recurring things that crops up, because obviously there's always people newly discovering Japan for the first time, or they've been maybe once or twice and just been to the major cities, like Tokyo and Kyoto or Hiroshima, those sorts of places. And then they're looking for a bit of support and encouragement to go off the beaten track a little bit more. And that's when perhaps the anxiety starts to rise. And that's understandable, but, it's not insurmountable, I guess, is the kind of overarching message.
One thing I wanted to say, and that I really appreciate about your first book a whole lot, is that it's not really a phrase book. So some people may think that it's just going to be a list of things to memorize or to look up, and it's not. It actually goes into so much more detail about how to use things like train ticket machines and like really practical ways to travel in such a way that I would expect that information to be in a regular guidebook, but it's not. And so this goes into far more than just the language. It's really practical day-to-day advice that people need. Even if they do speak Japanese, maybe they don't read Japanese. So it all can be very intimidating. So the first time we went to Japan, we were only in Tokyo because we were actually on a tour of Asia Pacific. So we only had a couple of days. And so this was literally just a stopover among many. But we only knew sumimasen, which is excuse me, and we never had the courage to actually say it. So we knew one word and never spoke it. And we were too intimidated because this was back in the early 2000s and the signage wasn't great. We were intimidated to even try some of the public transport. And a part of that was my wheelchair, and things weren't as great back then. But certainly we were just so confused by Shinjuku Station that we wouldn't even go down there. I mean, it was crazy. Nowadays, the signs all have English on them as well as Japanese, and that's been a wonderful positive change. But we were just so scared, and yet we had a fantastic time. We accidentally wound up in the middle of Golden Week. We didn't know what Golden Week was. Top tip to everybody, Golden Week is when the entire country shuts down for a week. So, you have to be very careful about what you're planning to do because the museums are closed, lots of things are closed, but you can still go shopping, you can still go eating. We spent a lot of time in Tokyo and a lot of money in Tokyo hands. But yeah, you can absolutely go to Japan without speaking a single word of Japanese.
That's
Nothing
right.
at all.
Yeah, and a lot of people wouldn't think that. They would think that they really won't get very far. But you're right, and the point is, I guess, that people going for the first time are going to be going to the most popular places with tourists, with foreign tourists in particular. So, Tokyo, Kyoto, Hiroshima, and a few of the others, Osaka maybe. And obviously these cities are well used to having foreign tourists, and they're well geared up for that. And, the Japanese culture obviously is very well known for its customer service and that kind of thing. And the Japanese have a phrase which says like the customer is God, basically, or is a god. And so they try desperately to try and accommodate people. And that's true not just of Japanese nationals, but also foreigners. So, hotels and so on, any kind of the chain hotels, they might not be chains names that you've heard of when you're in back home. But in Japan, there's sort of lots of chain hotels, and those ones are always going to be reliable for, if you're a first-time traveller, look for the mid-price range chain hotels. There's a whole bunch of them, and they will be very good for foreigners because the desk staff, they will all speak a little bit of English. They'll be used to having non-Japanese nationals staying with them, whether you're, whatever country you're from, whether you're from the West or other Asian countries. They're used to that, and they accommodate you accordingly. So, and then you're right also about the trains, and now, like nearly all the JR, I think probably all the JR lines now, all the signage has Romanized letters, so it's in English as well. The station names. So getting about is an awful lot easier than it was maybe even 10 or 15 years ago.
And one thing we mention on this channel a lot is that there may not be many people who speak English, but that doesn't mean they don't understand English. It's exactly what you were saying. So, you know, for anybody who's learned a language, the first thing that you will learn, you know, just the way the human brain works, is comprehension of what someone else is saying or what you're reading. And so they may not be able to communicate back to you in English at all, but they'll at least be able to point and gesture. Or there's obviously, you talk about all kinds of translation apps on your phone. You know, you would never want to rely on them for like real translation. Like if you're doing business or having signing contracts, you wouldn't use Google Translate. But if you're just trying to read a menu, then a lot of things can be very helpful. So, Rob, we've talked about the benefits and advantages of getting outside of sort of the major tourist areas. Do you have some places that you would especially recommend to us?
Yeah, I'm gonna be cheeky and do a plug for it's free, so it's not, you know, but I've got a guide called 5 Amazing Adventures to Experience the Real Japan is the full awkward clunky title, but it's very deliberate. But the point is it picks different experiences on different islands across Japan to try and give people a kind of a sense of the variety that's there. The different experiences that you can have, because Japan, you know, for a lot of people, they have quite a narrow view of Japan, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. It's just that that's what mainstream media feeds them. But once you go, even you were just saying about, you know, just stepping out of the cities, and you're right, it is all the same country, but it is very much, and the city centres are as much the real Japan as the quiet places. But you're right to emphasize that there is a big change. And as soon as you get out of the city, you jump on a train or you get on a highway, and very quickly you'll come out of the cities and you'll either get into mountains very quickly or you'll come onto flat plains and there'll be loads of farmland. I mean, the amount of farmland in Japan really surprises people once you get out of the cities. And so with my initial guide, which I wanted to give to all people that subscribe to my website, or they can download it on the website, it is free. I've got a copy here. So the 5 adventures in here are to try and give people a real sense of the differences. So the first thing, and these are kind of, they're quite varied, but they're very kind of Japanese in a way. So the first thing I say is to stay in a ryokan, a traditional Japanese inn. So I know that's something that you want to talk about in a bit more detail, because I think it's of interest to your audience. So we can come back to that. Second adventure is joining an icebreaker ship off the ice floes in the northern island of Hokkaido in the wintertime. That really is quite something special. And then the other ones are hand feeding deer in Nara Park, kodo drumming on the island of Sado, and scuba diving or snorkeling off the coast of Okinawa. And there is an extra one in here as well, which is about island hopping by bicycle in Shikoku. So Shikoku is a sort of an island that's kind of clustered in the southeast of Japan. So there's a lot of variety, and there's lots of islands. There's a group of major islands. Honshu is the main island where most of the places that people will have heard of, and if you go for the first time, most people will stick to Honshu. But if I encourage anyone to go immediately off the beaten track, and I try and encourage people, even first timers, to try and build this in if their itinerary is long enough, so if the time allows. But I always immediately suggest they head south down to Kyushu, the largest of the southern islands, because Kyushu's quite, relatively speaking, it's relatively compact, but there's loads of variety in the island. And you've got Fukuoka as a city in the north, which is kind of quite hip and trendy, and it's got a coastline, and you know that's kind of quite an up and coming kind of city, and it's got a very kind of street food culture. So that's quite a lively place to go, and there's lots of interesting architecture there that we've touched on earlier. quite a vibrant, youthful city. And then further south, you've got Nagasaki, which is obviously the second city to be bombed during the war, and that's been completely rebuilt. But again, it's got a lot of cultural, got a few historical areas, and that's a wonderful city. And that's one of my favorite cities in Japan, actually. It really seamlessly kind of blends those historical parts of Japan and the modern, because obviously it was a lot of it was destroyed during the bombing in the war, and it was a harbour. It's a natural harbour, so there's a lot of heavy shipping industry there. But then you go up into the hills; it's very mountainous or hilly very quickly, and there's all kinds of varieties of architecture. There's there's Chinese temples. There's Christian churches. You've got fantastic views from the mountain when you go up on a cable car. I mean, there's so much variety. They still have streetcars, trams that run up and down the city, so you can get to all the major spots. And they've got, in terms of the modern, they've got fantastic architecture for the Atomic Bomb Museum there, which is, is really, really worth seeing. I mean, I know a lot of people go and see the atomic dome and so on in Hiroshima. But the museum in Nagasaki takes a very different kind of approach to it. But it, again, really worth seeing. So there's always these places that are just off of the main track. I mean, you can stay on Honshu, the main island, and get off to do lots of different trips. So I would always encourage people, if possible, to try and get off of Honshu would be one of my first things I would suggest.
Let's segue into one of the questions that I know a lot of people have. And so that is, if you are wanting to go outside of the major cities, booking accommodation. So we're going to talk, where you're going to stay and then what that would be like, because we're starting to move into ryokan being more of the predominant option. But, just the entire process of, where do you even find these places? Because they may not be online, or are they?
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually, whenever I work with people who want to get advice on traveling, one of the things I always ask them is, one of my key questions is, what are you thinking of in terms of accommodation? And a lot of people just aren't really aware of the options. So obviously they'll think of, hotels, and chain hotels and those options. And some of the big international names, the Marriotts and others and Hiltons and so on, if you've got a bit of money, they've got a big presence in Japan. But as we mentioned earlier, there's lots and lots. I mean, there is a lot of chain hotels in Japan, and they all compete with each other, but they're all very much of a muchness, and the prices are very reasonable. There's a group of them that are referred to as business hotels, and basically it just means there are no frills. The rooms are fairly small. The storage for luggage is going to be minimal. Sometimes they won't have a wardrobe even, just a place to put your cases. But they are fantastic value for money, so they're an option. Then you've got all the kind of local things. So you've got ryokan, which are kind of traditional Japanese inns. So when you were traveling from one end of Japan to the other, these would be like the coaching inns that you would stop at and stay overnight, have your refreshments. Maybe if you're lucky enough, they'll have a natural onsen, like a hot spring there. You'll rejuvenate, have a good night's sleep, get up in the morning, have a hearty breakfast, and then you carry on your journey up the country, as a nobleman or whatever you were at the time, or a samurai, that sort of thing. But now these are very kind of, there's they fell out of fashion a bit in the 90s and early 2000s, but they're coming back now. They had a really difficult sort of decade or so. That was partly because of the Japanese government changing how they were legislating them and licensing them and so on. But they've kind of come through the tough times now, and hopefully after the pandemic is all behind us, we can all get back to them. But they are appealing much more now. Traditionally, they were kind of known as, like, a lot of old people would go and stay at ryokan because it was kind of a very nostalgic thing to do. But now it's kind of very much, there's a very big push for the youth culture movement. So, younger and younger people are going to stay in ryokan. So a ryokan is, and I'm going to talk about a very traditional, what I would consider a ryokan. I mean, there's all kind of variations of ryokan, and they're really just marketing things to kind of get people to dip their toes in them, and that's all fine. But a classic ryokan is going to be a wooden building, and usually a single story, maybe two story at most. And They are typically, because the objective was they were really to be resting spots, to really help people recuperate when they're on the road. So they were often built on natural hot springs. So you get that double bonus of people will, some of your readers, some of your followers will have heard of onsen. So those natural springs, ryokan were frequently, if possible, built on top of those to provide the maximum benefit. So, staying at a ryokan for me, you really want to try and choose one that's got an onsen, a natural hot spring, to make the most of it. And some of them have private onsen in the rooms, so you can have them in a room, and typically they'll be in a corner. If you're in a corner room or at the edge of the room, then there'll be shutters and they'll open to the local landscape, so you can see the mountainside next to you, the woodland, that sort of thing. There, it's absolutely wonderful to be so close to nature like that in those natural springs. But then they'll have typically an internal one, like a large bath. They may be two separate baths, one for male, one for female. Some of the even more traditional ones don't do the segregation. You can have mixed bathing, and bathing in onsen is always without clothes. And then they'll have rotembaro, which are the hot springs outside of the building. So these will be in the land that the ryokan owns that are around the buildings. And those are really magical. But one of the other main reasons that people go to ryokan, and certainly the Japanese do this a lot. I mean, most of the business for ryokan is Japanese nationals looking for an overnight break or a 2-day break at the weekend, if they can pull that off. Is very much sampling the kaiseki meals, the local food, over a course of like 10, 12 courses. And that's really something special as well. So that's a big part of staying a ryokan. You can book them just, kind of like half board, so you can have breakfast and don't pay for the meal. The meals are, going to add quite a bit to the cost. And ryokan generally are going to be a bit of an indulgence. I mean, they're not as ridiculously expensive as a lot of people think they are. I mean, you can stay in a ryokan for around about, certainly when you get off the main places, and these are kind of local ryokans, so they're not overtly luxurious, but they've got all the trappings that you're looking for. They've still got the local great food and all those things. They'll have the onsen, the natural hot springs, and all the character that you're looking for. But about $130, $150, yeah, for sure you can stay in a ryokan for $150 per person. That's definitely doable. But yeah, most of the time it's going to be a bit of an indulgence. But I always, whenever I'm in Japan, I always go to ryokan. My wife and I, we always do it. It's such a great experience, and I would always encourage people to do it. But if for whatever reason that's not possible for you, then a good alternative is a minshuku, which is a kind of like a Japanese B&B. Again, you'll probably be staying in a more traditional style housing, so it's going to be wooden mostly, and you might have 1 or 2 or 3 stories. It may be slightly. They're typically sort of used townhouses. There's often neighborhoods in the older cities that still have a lot of old neighborhoods. Like there's plenty of these in Kyoto. There's areas in Kyoto that have minshuku. And they're good because they're kind of like the budget version of a ryokan. And if your budget can't stretch to a ryokan, definitely stay in a minshuku, because those are going to be cheap. I mean, you can stay really cheaply. And in terms of tracking these kind of places down, it was really hard a few years ago, because to get to the good places, you really had to use Japanese language websites, accommodation websites. And that was really tough. If you didn't speak the language, you might use Google Translate, but even that was tough. You phone the places and a lot of them won't speak English, certainly back in the day. So that's tough. But even big names now like Booking.com in particular have done a big push in the last probably 3 years. They've really added a lot of minshuku and ryokan to their books now. So the great thing about Booking.com is they'll do price matching. So if you were able to find it elsewhere, you can still match the price anyway. And if you subscribe to Booking.com, you also get subscriber only discounts, which can be as much as 40% sometimes. So even if you want to stay in a minshuku or a ryokan and you're not sure where to start, I'd say start at Booking.com. So they've really got a lot of accommodation. There are more specialist. There's a place called Jalan, JALAN.net. That's a Japanese website for Japanese accommodation. That's in English, and they can take bookings for you in English. There's also a book that came out a couple of years back called Japanese. I've got a copy here actually. It's Japanese Inns and Hot Springs, and it's by an English guy called Rob Goss. He's the author, and the Akihiko Seki is the photographer, and they travelled from the top, sort of Hokkaido, Honshu, down to Kyushu. Not all the islands, but the major islands, Shikoku as well, and they picked out what they think are kind of 54 of the best ryokan to stay at in Japan. And again, the budgets vary, but they are probably, to be fair, slightly more on the pricey side. But all the famous ones are in here, but there's also loads of regional ones that you won't have heard of. So that's a good book to, if you can see that, that's a good book to pick up. And that's on Amazon. You can pick that up, no problem. So I think and then if you want to get a little bit more esoteric, you can stay in Shukubo, which is like Buddhist temples. So places that are in the mountains that are kind of Buddhist retreats, like Koyasan near Osaka in the Kansai area in Honshu. There's I think it's 52 Shukubo in the city there. Well, city, I say city, it's more like a town. It is a city technically, but it's more like a town, and it is just full of these Buddhist temples. It's a glorious place to visit, and those are really good to see. They are all, well, as far as I'm aware, they're all single story as well, but they're really good experiences. And the thing about those, because they are religious places, so and they're Buddhist, so that all the food there is vegan. Which can be a bonus for a lot of people. If you're vegan, obviously, or you're vegetarian, that's a real win. So yeah, those are a few places that you could try accommodation wise. But yeah, it's such a rich.
Shukubo like if you don't speak Japanese? Because I feel like that seems really intimidating. I know that some of them have like very early curfews or things like that, because obviously if you're living in a Buddhist monastery, they tend to go to sleep early, and so it has to be quiet after a certain hour, and then they tend to wake up early, check out maybe much earlier. That to me seems intimidating, because if I don't speak Japanese, am I going to be breaking rules without knowing about it? Is there any advice you have for that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I would say most of the shukubo that are open to tourists or to people to stay in are very much geared towards international tourism. Particularly, I wouldn't say overtly, but certainly they really do make an effort to accommodate foreign nationals. So a lot of the people that study Buddhism in Japan are actually very worldly. So they've got they've often traveled quite a lot before they've gone into the religious practice. So you'll quite often find that there'll be some that do speak English. In places like Koyasan that I mentioned, just outside of Osaka, that's a really good place to go, because it is one of the most important Buddhist centers for Buddhism religion in the whole of Japan. And yet the shukubo there, a good number of them will have English speaking staff, and even some shukubo are on booking.com.
And as I always tell people, if you're finding any kind of accommodation on an English oriented website, then you can be pretty confident that even if they don't maybe speak English, they will have all the signage in English. They'll have like a little guidebook for you, or any information that you may need, any specific local rules, or, often I book apartments through there. I use TripAdvisor, but TripAdvisor links into booking.com and other places. And so if I'm booking an apartment, maybe it's geared toward, actually one of the places I stay in Osaka is geared toward Chinese tourists, but you get there and they've got like this little pamphlet that has all the information in multiple languages in it. So they may not speak a lot at the front desk, but all of the rules, like do not wear shoes inside, that kind of thing, are all very clearly printed for you. Yeah, so you don't really need to ask them questions, because they already know what you're going to ask. So
yeah, that's a really good observation, actually, Julianne, because and a lot of the Japanese places are great for this, whether it's a restaurant or accommodation, but accommodation in particular, they'll have that kind of pre-printed sheet, and they'll have one in the different languages, and then there'll be all the basics. And then when you go into your room, there'll be an equivalent for, this is how the kettle works, or this is how the bath turns on, that kind of stuff.
So, Rob, let's talk about getting ready to plan for this trip. We just mentioned that I'm going to be going in March and I am in just about to start the actual planning process. But I know you have some wonderful resources that are available for me. You have information on your website and you have a book. So let's talk about those and maybe talk about the difference between what's on the website and what's in the book.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so the website, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation, is kind of structured into three parts, which is sort of dreaming, planning, and doing, if you like. And the bulk of the content, because that's where most people face the biggest number of challenges, is around the planning stage. And there's all kinds of ways you can approach it, and you can be very kind of regimented about how you approach it. And it's good to have some discipline and to understand the sort of details and nuances of what the advantages of good trip planning are. I don't bore people with those. I kind of just know them and have kind of just refined them over the years. So what I do on the website is I kind of structure the content to try and answer kind of a lot of the basic questions that people have. So there's like articles on like, maybe 5 things you should have before you go to Japan, things to think about or to actually buy before you start traveling. Things to think about in terms of how to structure your trip, to organize your trip. What are the kind of experiences that you want to get out of the trip? Think about what it's going to look like in hindsight and use those kind of future memories, if you like, to define and decide what you should include and therefore how you include it. And then there's the whole logistical stuff. This is weird because people think 2 things. I think a lot of people think Japan is a big country, but I think most Americans probably understand that it's not very big. It's slightly smaller than California in size, but there's a lot of variety in it, and it's kind of a long, strung-out island chain. So the logistics of getting around, even though everyone knows about the bullet trains being very kind of speedy and efficient, a lot of people often trip up in terms of allowing for the logistics of getting from place to place. So a lot of the content is kind of practical stuff. And that's the kind of things that, there's things you can find on Google, just searching, and TripAdvisor is good for reading other people's experiences and how they tackled stuff. And that's all good stuff to absorb. And there's certainly plenty of that on the website. But then there's some real specifics things. And there's an article called How to Plan a Trip to Japan in 4 Steps, which is like uber simplification, but it kind of is making a point about once you start to get into the mindset of putting a structure on trip planning, then you just simply go deeper and deeper and deeper. It can almost be never ending. And I actually did some research on this when I was building out the content for the site and answering the sort of common questions. And in terms of planning a trip, this is not specifically to Japan, just trip planning in general. I did lots of research over a few months on this. And there was one site that had quite adamantly said there's 5 steps, and there was another that said there's at least 18. So there's that kind of variety, depending on how you look at it. But the point is there's certain touch points that you have to think about in advance, build those into your trip planning, and then you're going to have a much, much better experience as a result of having sort of built those in. Now, some people enjoy doing that and some people don't enjoy doing it. Some people enjoy doing it up to a point, which is the most common experience. And the thing with Japan is it all becomes overwhelmed kind of pretty fast. I mean, there's so many great places and things to experience in Japan that it's like, well, hang on, I'd like to go here and I'd like to go there and I'd like to do this. And, before you know it, if you've only got like 3 weeks, there's only so much you can cram in. And, do you want to cram stuff in? I mean, some people do, and that's fine. But so there's actually quite a lot of consideration. So the website is kind of, there's lots of little pockets. There's a structure to it. There's a what I call planning hub. If you go to therealjapan.com/planning, you come to the planning hub, and that talks about some of these structures. But really, it just gives you an opportunity to dip into, if I don't know about organizing travel, for example, then I'll look at some travel guides. What about itineraries? There's some sample itineraries, for example, on the site, those sorts of things. So people can dip in and take what they need of it. And then I recently published a book which kind of follows on from that kind of hub called Planning a Trip to Japan, which kind of brings a lot of the website content into like a single volume. and it's in a kind of PDF format, so it's completely portable, so it's kind of device neutral. Yeah, so the idea with the book was really to draw together into one practical, easy to use, quick reference guide some of the most popular articles on the website that are in the planning hub. And it includes everything from kind of the basics, things to think about in advance of your trip and when you're planning, through to specific itineraries, and also some resources that you can use online, both things that I have and on other websites that are really useful for trip planning. There's one, for example, there's a section in there about an interactive map that actually the JAL, Japan Airlines, have. It's a bit tucked away in their website, but it's really, really helpful for trip planning and showing you how what's available in the different, right down in the different towns and villages at that kind of really local level. So some really specific stuff. I designed it as an ebook specifically so that it would be useful on the go. So and it's in a PDF format, so it's device neutral, so you can use it on your phone, your laptop, wherever you are. And because it's a PDF, you don't need internet access. But I did also design it to be printed out because I know some people prefer to have a printed version. And also a lot of people, and I know I and my wife do this, which is where we sometimes copy out sections from a book. So you can print out just a few key sections or guides that are particularly useful. So you've got them, in paper, on paper, so you can put them in your bag and so on. So this is what it looks like when it's printed. So it's kind of designed to be A4 size, but it's, that's the kind of approach I've taken. But it's, as I say, there's a bunch of guides in there, like how to plan travel to Japan, essentials you need before you come, etiquette tips, things to be aware of socially, how to prepare checklists and guides, that kind of thing. Then there's some specific resources, kind of like tools that you can use. And also information about access to discounted airfares that both ANA and JAL offer, for example, and they're only available to foreign tourists with a foreign passport. Also practical things like there's a Wi-Fi rental guide. If you're traveling with a baby, there's some information in there and a checklist as to what to look for when you're traveling with a baby. Things about seasonal travel, how-to guides, that kind of thing. And also there's a section on accommodation, and in particular looking for decent cheap hotels in Tokyo and how to book those. So yeah, that was the idea of it. Hopefully people will get some good utility out of it. The other thing about it, which I think is quite important to say, is a key added benefit of when you buy the book, you automatically get a free subscription to the Real Japan. And with that free subscription, you get access to our resource library. And within the resource library, a subscriber-only extra tools and resources, guides and so on, that extend some of the topics that are covered in the book. So you can delve into the bits that are in a bit more detail. And we mentioned earlier in the conversation, for example, there's an article on the website about using 4 steps as a structure for planning a trip. Well, in the resource library and referenced in the book is an actual planner which you can print out from the website. And again, these are all accessed once you get that free membership, a free subscription, once you get a copy of the book. So hopefully that will help extend the utility of the book itself. The idea with the books is really to sort of focus on an objective for the reader and to try and help them solve that. So the planning book just kind of has a lot of I think it's 25 different guides to achieving practical things when you're trip planning, basically.
Just distilling it down into the essential information that people really need for going to certain places. That makes a lot of sense.
And it's just addressing what I know are the most common roadblocks and the most common questions. So yeah, hopefully the book answers most of those, if not all of them.
So for people who are going to go further, you did mention that you have individual travel services. Can you tell us a little bit about what people are wanting from that? Like who goes to you, and then what do they want, and what part of their planning process do they start contacting you? Is it like,
sure,
I want to go to Japan, I don't know where to start, or are they like, they've narrowed it down, they've already done some of their own homework, and then they call you in? Where do they contact you?
It's you're right, because this is all related to, like, there's so much information, and you can find everything out there, but it's like managing all of that. What I find actually is that the vast majority of people do have some sort of itinerary in mind. They've either got a well worked out itinerary in a Google sheet with all the details, and sometimes really to a fine level of detail, the kind of thing that I provide for people, and they want me to sort of sanity check it, if you like. And other people just have a kind of a list of, it's almost like a wish list, so like a bunch of bullet points. So what I do with I've got 3 different services. One is travel planning calls, one is itineraries, and one is a full-blown travel planning service where I do the whole thing for people. Basically, I build everything from A to Z, other than book it for the person. I just hand it over, and then I provide them with all the links. It can sometimes include airlines, it will include accommodation, all the connections for your travel, all that kind of level of detail. But the starting point for the services is the travel planning calls, and these are kind of 30-minute calls where people can just jump on a Skype call with me. And the most part, those people are wanting me to sanity check some sort of draft itinerary. And most of the people that come to the Real Japan, the website, and our subscribers have been to Japan a few times. So they've done, Tokyo and Kyoto and the places they're familiar with. And sometimes it is just Tokyo and Kyoto. And some people, they've only been to Tokyo a couple of times, and they stay there for 2 or 3 weeks doing the little spider trips, going out of the city and that sort of thing. So they're looking for a bit more of a bit of an encouragement and a bit of support in terms of, I'm not quite sure, I'm a bit nervous, frankly, about making a mistake and doing something really daft. So can you help me with getting out of Tokyo and out of Kyoto, that kind of thing? Or they've been a few times, but they've been, mostly on Honshu that we spoke about earlier, and they're looking for other islands and other experiences. So the starting point for the call, in fact, the starting point for all of my 3 variations of travel service, is I ask people to complete a questionnaire online. And that's really twofold. It's to help them distill in their minds what it is they want out of the trip. So it's actually it's almost like a little bit abstract at first, because they come into it quite often with a very specific, and as I say, sometimes quite a well worked out itinerary. So what I then do is I sort of go back to them and say, hang on, you need to pause a bit. So I start off with the basics so that I can get an understanding of where they're coming from. And then once I've got an understanding of where they're coming from in their experience and their mindset, then I can offer them the best advice. So first of all, I want to find out, how many times have you been to Japan? Is this going to be your first trip? Is it your second or third? Have you been 5 or more times, for example? Just to get an understanding of that, because how I would respond to somebody who's asking for advice who's never been or has been 5 times would be, quite different. How do you like to travel? So what sort of transportation are you thinking of using? Are you thinking of flying internally? Are you thinking of buying the Japan Rail Pass and hammering the Shinkansen top to bottom? Have you thought about taxis or car hire? Do you want to really go local and just use local buses and local taxis, those kind of things? Do you want to go cycling? We mentioned that earlier in that 5 Adventures guide. People have quite specific transportation needs, and how those logistics of those different transportation elements knit together can be quite a logistical challenge. So that's something I can offer quite a lot of advice on. So I ask them to think about that. Obviously, the season they want to go in, so that's a good practical thing. And a lot of people, you mentioned earlier about, we were talking about when you might next be able to get out there. If you go to Japan in the winter, in terms of what we see in terms of I'm going to get this wrong, Northern Hemisphere, then, if you want to stay warm, just go further south. Go to the Ryukyu Islands or Kyushu, or go to Okinawa. You go down there. I was in the Yaeyama Islands, really fast. It's very close to Taiwan, and like a 3-hour flight from Tokyo, right at the very, very end of the Japanese island chain. And you go down there in December, and it'll be t-shirt and short weather. It'll be very, very nice. So, practical considerations like around the seasons, but then also things like, avoiding when the typhoons come in, those sorts of things. A lot of people plan trips and they don't realize they're planning all around the typhoon season. So things, not a great thing to do. But it's just because, that's when when they've traveled in their region, that's a time that they like to travel because they like the climate that way. But Japan is sort of long and thin, and the way it sits on the Earth is that you get a lot of variety. So in the extreme north, you're not far from Siberia, from the northern parts of Hokkaido, and then, as I say, once you get down to beyond the south of the island Okinawa, you're really into subtropical territory. So there's a lot of variety within the country, and actually that's a massive advantage because you can pick any season that you like. The only one I don't like is high summer. But you can actually, by choosing where to go, I mean, it is going to restrict you to a certain extent, but choosing where to go, you can manage those seasonal variations for your comfort and what you want. Obviously, budget is a practical consideration for starting point. And, when I spoke before about what's the 5 steps and what are the 18 steps or more potentially, budget is always going to be one of the ones that's in your plan at the earliest stage, because that's going to determine how long you can go, what you can do, and all the rest of it. So obviously budget, and we don't go into too much detail, but as long as I've got a sense of what people's budget parameters are, then I can be a bit more circumspect or a bit bolder in what I might suggest in terms of experience or accommodation type, for example. Then just practical things like if they have already got flights booked, and in normal times, a lot of people come to me when they've already booked their flights and they're trying to fill in the blanks. Literally, they've got their arrival date and their departure date, and they might be different cities, and so they want to know. So we arrive in Tokyo, but we're flying out of Kansai, and we'd like to go to Hokkaido if it's possible, and we'd like to go to Kyushu, and so I then kind of naturally guide them as to what's the most sensible route to do, and still go in and out of the airports that they're already booked in and out of. So things like that. Obviously, a list of destinations, but then those destinations would be driven by what their personal preferences are. So, are you interested in shopping? Some people love shopping, some people hate shopping. Depends sometimes what type of shopping. If you've got a lot of fans that your followers want to go, in Tokyo and get a lot to all the anime centers and all these sorts of places, then you're going to want to allow time for that, and you want to encourage that. Some people might want to go to cultural places, like the whole traditional experience we spoke about earlier about staying in a ryokan or soaking up in the onsen, those sorts of things. And so what I do is I've got a whole list of questions that I ask people about, rating these 1 to 5, 1 being not very interested at all, thank you very much, but 5 being absolutely must do this. And to get people to then fill in that, and then again, that kind of level of detail. And quite often they've kind of built a trip, but they haven't really kind of thought about those things through, So once I'm kind of reverse engineering what they've already done. And when we have that conversation, they say, yeah, okay, yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I hadn't really thought about that. We wanted to do this. And then they say, actually, I've realized we wanted to go to castles and we haven't got any castles in there, this kind of thing. So it's really, and it is because, and I still do it even now, and then you probably do it still yourself, Julianne, is no matter how frequently you go, you still do stuff that you think, oh, hang on, I should have done this. So you can never have the perfect trip. You can get close to it, and the more you plan and the more structure. And obviously, I've been doing it for years. I've got a huge database that I keep of everything. So accommodation by city, experiences by town. And it's all indexed and tagged in different ways. So if people's interest is, I'd like to do a cultural route and do do some pilgrimage stuff on Shikoku, or, I want to go skiing in the north, or, these kinds of different specialists, if you like, or relatively niche interests, then I can guide them accordingly. And for me, it's a much more, it's about me assembling the best solution, the best fit for what it is they want based on their feedback. But often it's only when we get on a call, then they've completed that questionnaire in advance of the call. That's the first step of the process, that they actually say, yeah, okay, yeah. So I hadn't realized what I've done is this, but I need to do that. So the whole service, all of them, starts with the questionnaire. For the call, it's the simplest thing. And obviously for the big full planning, travel planning service, the biggest service that I do, it's much more detail. So they're just more depth, really. But then we come on the call, which lasts for half an hour. And then we basically, I say, and also in that questionnaire, there's, just some things like, so what are your main questions that we focus on the call? Because really what we want to do on the call is I record them like you're doing today, so that the viewer can just focus on our conversation, don't have to take notes. I will provide them with, so they've got a copy of the video afterwards. Then I provide them with almost like a transcript of the conversation. And if I mention specifics and I'm using, local town names or names of services that, are words they've never heard before, I'll have them all written out in the notes, almost like show notes, if you like, after the conversation. And they get like a follow-up email with a whole bunch of things to follow up in addition to the call itself. And if they want, some people don't have an itinerary. So if they want a map included in that shows the major points on their plan, then I'll include a map as well. There's not really a fixed amount of deliverables, as it were. It just depends, because every person's needs are different.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there are a lot of us in our generation who maybe traveled extensively 20 years ago, but all the skills have gotten rusty. So maybe we used to have the Euro pass and we went to 25 countries in Europe in 7 days or something ridiculous. I certainly have 72 hours. I went from Italy to Paris to London and then back down again. 72 hours. I am not 19 anymore. That does not happen. I feel like probably another part of your service is getting people. Yeah, but I feel like part of what you would do is like getting people to maybe slow down a little too, because there are all these on Instagram in particular or Pinterest. You'll find this like 4 days in Tokyo, and they have like 80 something places you're supposed to see in 4 days. And I'm like, okay, maybe if you're 15 and all your body parts don't creak anymore, but maybe limit that down to sort of 6 a day, not 15 places a day. I really caution people to be careful when they're just looking at an itinerary that they pulled off of the internet, especially if it's geared towards, taking the perfect Instagram photo, because those people are assuming that you're going to spend like 10 minutes a place, take a couple pictures and go.
Exactly.
So just because you found an itinerary doesn't match your needs. And I absolutely love your concept of like future memories. Like, what do you want to achieve with this trip? And I think so many people I want to go to Japan, and they don't even know why they're going and what they want to feel afterwards. So I've seen a lot of people get too bogged down in the details that they forget the whole purpose of the trip.
It's a fine balance, because for a lot of people, especially if it's their first trip, I think most people that go to Japan are the sorts of people that are just of a mindset that they kind of probably know they're going to go more than once, almost certainly. If they're going to choose to go once, they're almost certainly going to go more than one. So the first thing I say to them, look, is if you really think you're probably going to go more than once, just assume you're going to keep going as long as you can afford to do so, because you'll keep going wanting to go back. So just, take a breath. Let's try and distill. Let's focus on what the kind of, as you say, the memories you want out of it. This is the way I always approach it. Think about on reflection, what would you like to be telling, what would you have wanted to do? And then we'll distill it down to make sure you're getting all those takeaways, but we're doing it in a comfortable way. I do frequently see, people's itineraries, and Tokyo is always the best example, where they're going to go here, 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 and here. I'm thinking, God, I would do like, they've got like 6 things in a day, and I'm thinking I'd maybe do 2 or 3 of those in a day. They're like doubling up what I would comfortably want to do. And then even allows, and and I can't tell you the amount of trips that I see, and they haven't even thought about food. Just in terms of, they might be saying, okay, I want to have this, this, and this, but their days are so packed. I'm thinking, look, where you're going to be, there's just no good restaurants in that part of town, or that part of the city. Depending on where they are, Tokyo, there's great places everywhere, but, in different, so I'm thinking, and that is very common, actually. A lot of people don't even think about, but again, I guess perhaps it's because, they're nervous about booking restaurants. There's if you go to therealjapan.com/resources, there's a page full of the things that I recommend in terms of services online that you can use. And there's a couple on there, Buy Food and Cookly, where you can actually, and Voyaging do it as well, where you can actually pre-book restaurants using an English language website. So just having a few of those key food experiences pre-booked, honestly, those are really good anchor points that you'll be really grateful for when you get there, because a lot of days you can just wing it. If if you're going to Fukuoka in Kyushu and you just know there's loads of great street food, yeah, you probably don't need to book a restaurant. You can just stroll around and see what takes your fancy. But there's other places where you're going to have to book it well in advance, especially in some of the places in Tokyo where they book out months and months. I mean, I get people that are doing trip planning, and I frequently see accommodation and restaurants that are booked at least 8 months in advance. 12 months is not uncommon. So if you're saying, oh, that hotel's great, we'll go there next year, you really do need to look at it, check availability, because they just be surprised at how far in advance in Japan, key restaurants and key accommodation. And this is some large hotels that have got a lot of rooms as well. And again, obviously, it depends on what's happening locally in Japan, whether it's holiday season, whether there's a festival going on. That's another one, which is commonly people who are traveling, they're not aware of local clashes with local or regional festivals, which means accommodation is going to just be a no-show for them, because it'll all be booked out by locals months in advance.
Or they're like me and they went up there during Golden Week and they wanted to go to museums, but they're closed. I've also heard of people who travel during Obon and don't realize that, everyone splits out of town. They got to go home. That's the whole cultural thing. And, if you were expecting certain things and not checking the local Japanese cultural calendar, you could be in for a big surprise, which definitely happened to us the first time. So I think that is really a great all-round idea of what we can expect from you. You have so many wonderful services that are available. We have been chatting for a really long time, and I know my audience's time is valuable, so we'll probably have to wrap up here. But if you guys do have any questions after the fact, you could always contact Rob at
therealjapan.com.
And Rob will certainly be able to, hopefully answer your questions, or at least point you in the right direction. We certainly hope. And obviously check the website first. You don't want to be asking the same thing that has been asked many, many times. And we are also available with the Kashikon. For those of you who have been with me through this we're almost coming up on a year of this channel. So you guys can always contact me as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Julianne, if people do go to the website, all of my blog posts have comments available, and a lot of people share their experiences, and a lot of people use it to ask questions. Don't be shy. Leave a comment. I answer every single one. Or if it's a guest post, I get the author of the guest post to respond with their local or expertise knowledge. So please do. That's a great way. But you can always email me as well at hello@therealjapan.com, and I'll be happy to reply.
That's great. Well, thank you so much again. We really appreciate this, and we hope that everyone is getting ready to move from their dreaming stage into their planning stage, as we can start hopefully looking forward to coming to Japan in the next, within a year at least, maybe hopefully a lot sooner. So thanks so much.
Yay! Thanks, Rob, for that. I want to reach back into the screen and tell myself to adjust my shirt. For those of you who do keep up with what I'm wearing, this is Cakes with Faces. You may recall that I recommend her merchandise and her travel planning book quite often. So if you have already checked out at some point in the future all of The Real Japan, then make sure you also spend some time to pop over to Cakes with Faces YouTube channel. So thanks for those of you who have been with us through the interview. I know that we've had some people come and go during this time, and we really appreciate you. We have had a fairly profound question that has been asked during the chat during this time, so I will be diving into that now. This may not be of interest to everyone, but this is about if you want to go to Japan and you want to meet people and you want to get to know people who live in Japan, but you don't speak English. Hi, Lester Kenny Cosplay. Just remember, everybody, this will be back on YouTube and on the Okashicon channel so that you can go back and watch the replay. We had a small video glitch going on. That was our software. That'll actually be edited back to the higher quality videos. So even if you did miss things, you can go back. Usually they're on our channels tomorrow. And then YouTube also does provide closed captioning for us. If you do need that service, that is automatically included in YouTube afterwards and also on our website. So if you did miss this interview, or if you have friends who would like to see this interview, you can absolutely go back and watch that. All of our, I don't know if the demo disc show is on, but all of the other shows here on Akashicon Online are available after the fact. Sometimes it takes us a little while to put it up on our website, but it is available on YouTube. Remember that all of the links that were provided in today's show will also be available in the show notes. Especially check our website first, because we can be slower at putting them on YouTube. And for those of you who would like to book any of Rob's services or purchase any of his books, I personally own both of his books, we will be having affiliate links in those show notes as well, so that we can get a small commission for Akashicon. That is not the reason why I did this channel. In fact, Rob only mentioned it very shortly afterwards, after we'd had this conversation, that he was going to give us the affiliate links. So that was not our plan. We did not bring you this presentation to try to sell you anything whatsoever. It's more that I really support the work that he does. I think this is completely unique in the travel industry, to have someone just there as like an older brother to hold your hand and to kind of say, you know, I did cut out some of the interview. We were talking about some of the mistakes people made because we didn't want to embarrass them. But, you know, some people will try to build an itinerary in Japan, not realizing either how big or how small Japan is, or how long it can take to get from point A to point B. And so they're like, hey, I've got a Japan Rail Pass. I'll just use it everywhere I'm going, and they want to go from Tokyo up to Hokkaido and back into Kyushu, not realizing that it could be 12 hours even on a bullet train, and maybe you're wasting 2 days to go back and forth that way. So there's just a bunch of little tips and ways that Rob or other people who, if you might want to find some other kind of travel handholder, travel advisor, I'm not talking about necessarily a travel agent, because they don't always have on the ground experience in the country where you're going, but finding someone who can help you. Certainly here at Akashicon, that is one of our goals. So that's why we put on these presentations, to help you learn more so that your future trip planning can be a little bit smoother. But sometimes you really need very personalized advice. So I'm not going to step on Rob's business. I'm not going to get into that myself, but you can always come to Japan Stories and ask us questions in the chat. So let's get to that question that Sefi Hakubi asked, and that is, the specific question that he said was, you know, Sefi, by the way, is a DJ that often works with us here on Akashicon Online, and was wanting to go to Japan and meet people in the music business. Now, I'm not in the music business, so I don't have a specific answer, but I can tell you what I did to meet people in the fine arts, fiber arts, and some of the related communities. I also know a lot of people who are translators. So whether it's for manga, anime, also a lot of authors. I haven't written I haven't published any work in a very long time, but somehow you kind of fall into these communities and then meet a whole bunch of people. So I know a lot of these authors, and that's where these shows, like our New Year's Eve show and our Japan Summer Festival that is coming up in July, kind of come out of, is I've met all these people online. So my advice, if you want to get to know people in Japan before you go, is to find people who speak English. Now, a lot of these are not going to be native Japanese. They're going to be expats who are living in Japan, and that is a little tricky, because there are some expats who go to Japan who maybe they're sent there for work. It's not been their choice to go to Japan, and they just kind of live in what they call the expat bubble. They don't really interact with natives. They don't necessarily speak Japanese, and so their experience may not be an authentic Japanese person's experience. So I will give you a little bit of caution as you are meeting people who speak English but live in Japan, just to understand that they may not have the type of background that you're looking for. For me, that's not a problem. I mean, they're friends. If I'm just making friends, I'm not necessarily trying to use them for something, but you know that I've been able to meet some wonderful, cool people. That's where we've had like Lisa Wallen, who's a correspondent in HK World, Alfie Goodrich, who's a very famous photographer over there, Josh Grisdale of Accessible Japan, who we had on the show last month. So I just go on Twitter and I start Googling Japan related people. I say Googling. Googling's the wrong word on Twitter, right? You go in the search box. I know Googling is sort of a generic term, but I don't even use Google for searching anymore. So I go in the search engine and I look for some specific individuals. Now, one person I will recommend who seems to know most everyone, his name is Craig Hoffman, and his Twitter handle is Craig Hoffman 11 or 11. Lester Kenny Cosplay says Kid Shoryuken offers tours of Akihabara. Definitely, like, you can meet people on Patreon, which is what Lester Kenny's Cosplay is talking about. There's also groups. I will have to look this up. I know I've mentioned it in a previous show. I think it might have been on Budget Travel in Japan. I don't remember what show I mentioned it in, but there are now places where you can go book individualized tours. So these tours may not be walking tours, they may be classes. So things like we took a class on learning how to cook, and we were in an actual Japanese restaurant kitchen because they closed between lunch and dinner, and they had this class that was in the middle of it. So these are just individuals who have a particular interest and they speak English and they want to offer their expertise. They often very inexpensive compared to other walking tours. They're like volunteer tour guides as well who don't charge you whatsoever. So I believe you can go back and watch some of our previous Japan Stories episodes. I would check the budget travel one first. I'm not sure what other episodes I've mentioned in, but I know that we have covered it in the past, where you can meet people who are willing to be a host or a tour guide while you're over there. But to meet people who are individuals before you go to Japan and to sort of develop an online friendship with them, Twitter is the most essential social media for people in Japan. So they will use both Twitter and Line. Now, Line is more for people who you've already gotten to know, so they use it more as instant messaging and phone calls and things like that. You can sometimes be on groups, and the group chats that I'm in have all been from Japan-based YouTubers who then have community groups online. Some of those are moving more into Discord now, but still, the point I'm trying to make is you can go on Twitter and you can start to meet some individuals, and then Twitter will start recommending other people to you. Now, I always like to check that they've posted recently, because obviously my original Twitter account is like 13 years old and I don't post on it much anymore. So if people go friend me on the Sick Chick, you're not going to see much of anything because I hardly ever post there. I started a new account 3 years ago and that's where I am. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, Kintsugi Style, KINTSUGISTYLE. That's also my Twitch handle. So if you see me commenting in the chat, that's exactly how it's spelled. I have somehow gotten in there. I followed a couple of people. I followed Craig Hoffman. I followed The Real Japan. I followed some other individuals who were involved in, who are either travel agents or authors or things like that. And then I would just get people who would like retweet tweets for me, and then other people would follow me. And I've now developed a network of probably about 4,000 or 5,000 people. Now, I don't know all these 4,000 or 5,000 people. Let's be honest, I know probably about 400 that I'm on sort of a first name basis with, well beyond my, it's not Dunning-Kruger. I can't remember the name, the like 150 people that you could be friends with number. Far beyond that, but I've been on there long enough that I could have a conversation, slide into their DMs and say, hey, do you want me to promote your book kind of thing, with a large number of people who are involved in publishing. My husband and I own a small business that is in IT consulting for publishing. So that is kind of the our business angle there. And then also because I've had art in a Tokyo gallery and I know a lot of people who are involved in that. Also, I tend to be very involved in the disability community. So people like Barrier Free Japan, Accessible Japan, etc. Once you meet a good sort of dozen people and then follow their tweets, you will start to see who they interact with often. There are a few people who are sort of central to what I call the English-speaking Japan Twitter. I don't have a better name for that. I can't call it Japan Twitter because obviously there's so many people who are only on Twitter in Japanese. But you can follow certainly like people who are Japanese teachers, like Tokini Andy. Tokini Andy has a thriving community on Discord as well. So if you are studying the Japanese language at all, it is a great way to get in his Discord. So Tokini, Tokini Andy, Andy. He has free learning Japanese classes on YouTube, uses the Genki textbook system, and then he's going into Quartet for intermediate. So those are completely free. He does have a Patreon if you want more advanced exercises, like he has additional videos and also tests. But I'm not going to get into learning Japanese online, but I would say his Discord community has about 1,000 people who are very interested in Japan. Some of them live there, others of them travel there often, and just find a community that is similar enough to your interests and start just networking with people online. And by the time we went on our first, I say we, with my husband, we went on our first long trip. So this is the one that was 2 months long in spring of 2019. We went for our 20th wedding anniversary. But by the time we went on that trip, I had been on Twitter for about 18 months, and we were able to meet up with, honestly, a couple hundred people that I had either were friends or friends of friends. We went to the YouTuber Hanami that had 300 people in there. So to get invited to a YouTuber only event when I hadn't even started my YouTube channel yet, those are the types of connections you can very easily make. And Twitter is absolutely essential to that. And then also, again, if you follow certain people on YouTube, they have very active, thriving communities. So only in Japan, the Tabby Eats guys, they have a very, the Tabby Eats guys, they will follow you all over Instagram and all of your social medias. I'm not saying them, I'm saying their community. They follow me as well. But again, I've known them. I've met them online. I've had communications with them. So the more that you can sort of interact with people on social media who speak English, the more they can refer you to other people who maybe they don't tweet in English, but once they know where your interest is and who you're wanting to meet, they're more than happy to make introductions. So for instance, on our New Year's event, for those of you who are able to watch our New Year's event, I know it's on our website somewhere, we had a 4-hour series of interviews, and we're going to do that again for an 8-hour series of interviews coming up in July. I met Felicity Tillich, who I knew a little bit, but then she's a filmmaker in Japan, and then she introduced me to other people who we'd met, we follow each other on Twitter, but we didn't necessarily know each other very well. And so as a result of that, I've gotten to know other people a little bit better, people who are writers. So like Uncanny Japan and Unseen Japan. I get those two confused all the time. Those are two accounts that I really recommend following. I also would follow someone like Spoon and Tamago and Matcha, is a web magazine. Now, I don't know Spoon and Tamago personally, but once you start following them, they have all kinds of amazing links that they send out to you. Masha, which is a web magazine, actually follows me now because I've been, like I said, Twitter just has this wonderful algorithm of recommending people to you. Once you kind of get into a pod, as I would call it, like a little dolphin pod, they're really good at saying, hey, you might be interested in this person, you might be interested in that person. So even though I only have less than 2,000 followers on Twitter, the number of people who are high quality individuals who are English speakers in Japan is very, very high. So I'm just going to check on what Sephi has responded, saying, just subscribe to Takini Andy as well. Looks well, in depth, and probably the most popular study guide for Japanese. Absolutely. You said that you're sort of mentioning that you had followed George Tromley, who is Japanese from Zero. I follow him as well. I did watch that, although I find that the order that his books were in kind of threw casual Japanese in way too early for me, and I kind of got in over my head and I stopped. But because some of the courses that I have used the Genki book, I followed Takini Andy and Takini Andy's group community. Even though I haven't watched the videos to study Japanese in a while, he doesn't care. But we just have this group of people. So manga recommendations, anime recommendations. We even have just a little group that's discussing what's going on with COVID in your parts of the world. So we have people who are there from Greece. We have people who are there from India, absolutely everywhere in the world. And like the day that Canada opened up for vaccinations, we just got this stream on our Discord going, hey, I got my COVID vaccine. And we were all a bit confused until we realized they were all from Canada and we never even noticed. But I just find that social media has opened so many doors to me. Sometimes you can reach out specifically to companies and be pleasantly surprised that they are interested in hosting you or are setting up a meeting with you. I just cold called Olfa. I knew about Olfa through some of the work that Lisa had done and some of the programs on NHK World. So because I knew someone who was involved in Tokyo Weekender magazine, which is Lisa Wallen, and also hopefully a future guest that I'll be having soon, Sarah Hodge, who is unfortunately just moved back from Japan, but she was also an author on Tokyo Weekender magazine. If you don't know Tokyo Weekend magazine, it is a free magazine publication that is in English, and it is available to pick up in various locations around Tokyo. Tourist offices, especially the tourist office in Ginza, many hotels have it, and it's a monthly guide. And then once you start meeting the people who write for Tokyo Weekender, because they're all very active on social media, then you can start making other connections. That they're like, hey, I went to this thing and I think you'd be really interested in it. So a lot of my itinerary for the 2 trips that I made in 2019 was built up by recommendations from people that I've met on social media. So I really cannot recommend this strongly enough. Again, it's not going to be a lot of Japanese natives. I do have Japanese native speakers for Japanese nationals as well. They tend to mostly be people who are Japanese teachers or people who are learning English, so they just want to exchange skills with you. Maybe you get involved with them on some actual language networking apps like HelloTalk, Langaid, Busuu, things like that, so you can meet people that way if you're specifically interested in language exchange. But even if you're not interested in language exchange, I know from my personal experiences being an expat, and I'm going to take this away from the language issue for a while, because the majority of places that I've lived, I have either spoken the language or had enough of a language background that I was comfortable living there. Italy is the only country that I've lived in where that wasn't an English-speaking country. But even when I lived in the UK or lived in Australia, there can be a certain amount of loneliness when you've just uprooted your entire life and moved to another country. Even in my case, if I was moving with my husband and I had in-laws there, when I lived in Italy, I have family that's Italian, but there's still a certain amount of loneliness that can happen when you are floundering around. You've just had to change your entire life. And the expat community can be very, very welcoming because they understand what you're going through. They can be very supportive. And also, they want to know maybe what's changed in the several years since the last time they've been able to go home. So, or another way to make friends, if you're planning to go to Japan and you want to kiss up to people, is just ask them if you can bring them anything from your place of origin. So yeah, the last time I went to Japan, I was carrying hot sauce and certain candies. Let's see, I actually brought someone's phone. I didn't buy the phone, but like their family sent me a phone and I brought it to them. It was a secondhand phone, so it wasn't like a customs issue. But yeah, it's like I bring books with me, English-speaking books or English language books that I'm getting ready to get rid of. I'm planning on throwing them out anyway. I like to bring over extra luggage with me that is free on the way there, leave books behind as gifts, and then come back with more room for my shopping. So there are just so many ways that you can make friends in Japan before you go to Japan. And just find 2 or 3 key people and say, look, I'm just looking to meet people in this particular field. Don't go in it with an agenda. Don't go looking for free translator services or something like that. That's not going to happen. If people are professionals, pay them what they're worth. If I need to hire a translator for a project that I'm working on, I will pay them. I mean, I will have friends that I know I can go to, but I will pay them whatever their day rate is. Don't cheap out on people just because they're your friends. If they've been your really good friends for a long time, like I have a friend from high school. Yeah, okay, I'll take a little bit of an advantage for her, but that's different. I'm not talking about people that you're going out with the intention of approaching for business purposes. Don't, as Missy says, don't be a creep. Don't be like approaching people for the sake of getting something out of them. But that's true in all business situations. But if you're just looking to make relationships and connections, be genuine, be honest, just say, look, I just want to make friends. I just want to meet people. And then see how it develops organically. So for me, it has been a very positive experience. I remember one time, the time that I was in Japan, I mentioned in the chat, during typhoon season, we kind of got stuck there in the middle of typhoons for a while. And I was there. It was my first international solo trip in over 20 years. But I had a really good friend that I had met online. She was from Texas, so that helps. If you can find someone who's from your area originally, you can kind of bond immediately. And I was just kind of feeling a little lonely. And she called in 12 people to hang out with me on one afternoon. Or I just posted a post saying, I'm bored and I want to, can I take somebody out to lunch? Anybody? I had 2 people who I really didn't know very well take me up on that, took me to an izakaya and translated for me. Kind of held my hand unexpectedly, like I planned to meet up with someone at lunch and had gotten some really bad news. And she just sat there with me and held my hand as I was like crying in the middle of a restaurant. Somebody I had never met. Maybe had like 10 or 15 very brief interactions with over the past 2 years. And she's like, hey, that's nice. Or, I like your article, that kind of thing. But they were really welcoming and supportive. And I find that the English speaking community in Japan is just some of the nicest people I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, they've all been really lovely. And, you know, as long as you do the usual thing and avoid politics and religion in your conversations when you're just getting to know people, you can be a very enriching experience. So, Steffi, that's not really giving you the answer. Like, I can't give you names, but that was the approach that I took. And I have never stepped foot in Japan in the past couple of decades without having somebody that I had their phone number or their line connection. As Lester Kenny Cosplay said, a lot of people don't use phones anymore. They just communicate through line. So the moment you've got their method of communication, I have never been without somebody there to help me. Even if I didn't take advantage of it, I mean, you don't want to take advantage, but even if you don't need it, you can just have that backup there. And plenty of people will offer you advice on things. So when we were looking at where we were going to get an apartment, I've mentioned this several times in this channel that I use TripAdvisor or Booking.com to book an apartment, or sometimes if I'm going to my language school, they'll book one for me. But they would give me options of like where possible apartments were, and I would just go online and say, "Oh, which place should I stay in? This one or this one?" And Josh of Accessible Japan he doesn't even remember doing this for me. That's how amazing he is. He would just be like, "Oh, well, the station at that station has, you know, stairs at this place, so maybe you don't want to stay in this location," or, you know. And Alfie Japanorama was the same thing. He was just like, "Oh, well, this is a really cool community." And like all these people who barely knew me at that time, we've since developed deep friendships, but at the time barely knew me, were willing to just sort of chip in and offer advice. So I hope that can be a takeaway for all of you, that if you really wanted to get to know the Japanese culture better, but the language is your sticking point. Now, Steffi, I think you undersell yourself. I know that you know more Japanese than you let on. Maybe you need a refresher, but I know that you're better than I am. So I still would never let the language be a barrier. I would go back, I would read Rob's book on how to travel in Japan without speaking Japanese. So many details are in that book, even if they're not directly related to the language. Maybe it's just how to use the machines. Certainly that was really helpful for us when booking certain train reservations, because you can be a little bit confusing. One of the things we try to do on this channel is also give you heads up on little quirky things that we've experienced. So if you have other concerns, please let me know. Please contact me. My email is juliannejapan@gmail.com. I would love to know what your hesitations and reservations are. What may be keeping you from going certain places in Japan, or even traveling to Japan at all, other than the fact that tourists are currently banned. I can't help you with that. I wish. But no, if there are things that you're having questions about, I'm happy to give you my experience as best I can. My experience may not line up with yours. Rob's experience may not line up with what you particularly need, but just the community out there has been fantastic. And I think that's one of the reasons why we here at OkashiCon have wanted to support you in going to Japan as much, as because we know that it is such a fabulous experience. But we also know it can be a little bit scary. So we've been trying over the past year to kind of gently talk you through some of your concerns, but if there's other ways that we can assist, please let us know. Steffi's just saying, Mango Languages, been on the phone for teaching you. I mean, I skip around in my Japanese learning apps all the time. I do have a regular Japanese class with an instructor just to help me stay on track. Honestly, I just need the nagging more than anything. Lester Kenny Cosplay says, is it true that Roppongi at night is dangerous? Depends on your definition of danger. I have heard of some women getting groped, unfortunately. If that's what and I don't mean more violent assaults, but you know, there's some hands in places they shouldn't be. I've certainly heard of that. Certainly, Japan has a culture where when you're drunk, they kind of consider that anything goes. I probably, as a woman, would not go to Roppongi by myself at night. But if I were with a group of friends, I would have really no problems going there. So Steffi says, yeah, someplace it can be kind of creepy. Roppongi, for those of you who don't know, is where there are a lot of host and hostess clubs. So it already attracts the party expat scene. So people who are maybe only there because they want to get drunk and dance and maybe do illegal activities with drugs, which I obviously do not recommend. You do not want to get kicked out. Roppongi just has some unpleasant people who congregate there. Yeah, compared to Kabukicho, Kabukicho, I mean, there'd be drunks wandering around, but I would not feel unsafe in Kabukicho. My language school is in Kabukicho as well, so I never had a problem being there after dark whatsoever. Maybe also because I watched Tokyo Diner, which is set in Kabukicho, and I thought, well, you know, actually that it looks perfectly safe there. I wouldn't say that Roppongi was unsafe. You can be a little creeped out, so I wouldn't go by myself. But I don't think you're going to be in like active dating. No one's going to like mug you, rob you, murder you. If that's, it just depends on what your definition of safe is. But if you might feel uncomfortable, people hitting on you, maybe aggressively, yeah, that could happen. And that is probably, as Sefi said, that is really the only place in Tokyo that I can think of that would be that situation. Now, again, if it's before 10 or 11 at night, it's probably not a problem. But late night, a lot of drunk people, a lot of intoxicated people, people who are not on their best behavior. And certainly I have heard a lot about women getting groped. Certainly, like the shirt that I'm wearing is probably too low cut to be wearing in Roppongi if you're not going to get unwanted attention. I would definitely keep it very conservative up to here. For some reason in Japan, legs are considered acceptable, but any kind of cleavage is not, and will get you catcalled and all kinds of other things. So that I don't want to slam Roppongi. I mean, Roppongi in the daytime is great. They've got a wonderful Don Quixote. They've got some fantastic international supermarkets and things like that. We lived about a mile away and would go there fairly often. But yeah, at night, I don't know. It's not my scene. If I were 22 again, maybe I would like it. I certainly have been to the kind of hardcore club scene in Europe when I was younger, going to like raves in Switzerland when I was 18 kind of thing, but I'm not 18. So Steffi says it was the Japanese and African wise guys trying to bring you into the club. Yeah, there will be people standing on the street saying, hey, come into our club. There have been some scams that happen, so there are some potential for like, hey, come into the club. It's the cover price is like 5,000 yen, but then they want to charge you 50,000 yen to get out. I just be careful. Like in any tourist area, there can be scams going on. Kabukicho used to be a lot worse about that. Certainly when we first stayed in Shinjuku in 2004, we were right next to Kabukicho. And there was some shady stuff going on. There was probably some prostitution that, you know, was only lightly disguised. That has been substantially cleaned up in Kabukicho because they've really been trying to enhance their tourist image. But it would not surprise me at all if that stuff isn't still going down in Roppongi. Again, it's more likely to be scam and just sleazy people than any kind of like violence. So when you say the word safe, you know, I've lived in places like London and Chicago where that means getting shot in a drive-by. So that's not going to happen to you anywhere in Japan. But yeah, scam artists and things like that can be a problem. The more they try to attract from their marketing 20-something-year-old English-speaking men, the more likely there's something iffy going on there. I don't want to say that's certainly not the people who all attend there, but if their marketing is very clearly at, you know, young college American guys, and that's who they're trying to bring in, they think those guys are suckers and they can get away with, you know, scamming them or other things. Or you get a whole, I mean, even in the United States, I would not be hanging out with, you know, by myself in a crowd of sort of 20 or 30 drunk college students, especially drunk guy college students, because they can behave inappropriately. Obviously, not all of them. Do not mean to say that whatsoever, but there seems to be a group dynamic when young people get together and they're very, very wasted and they stop behaving in the ways that they would behave when they were sober. And I personally find that uncomfortable. So I hope that has answered your question. As Sefi says, that a lot of times we think of the Yakuza in the same way that we think of the mob, or especially like the Russian mob, and that's not necessarily appropriate because they will actually kind of crack down on bad behavior. I'm not going to get into that. That's way above my personal experience and understanding. But I will say that as Steffi says, there are certain YouTubers who will get into much more detail about that. And I believe it was Unseen Japan has an article about that as well. How some of the problems that were happening about 15 years ago, people are really preying on tourists and pedestrians. The Yakuza had just said, that's not happening in our territory. That's actually the way the Italian mafia used to be about 130 years ago in Sicily. But again, I don't want it to sound like I'm defending these organizations. That is not the case whatsoever, and I don't even know that much about them to have a very strong opinion. But I will say that there is a certain amount of truth that certain types of violent crimes had been cracked down because it was interfering with other types of activities, and they had the ability to stop it where maybe the police didn't. So I wouldn't say that there's anywhere in Japan that I would be afraid for my life or be afraid of any violence unless I were getting mixed up with the wrong community. Like, I mean, obviously, if you're going to someone's house and they've got guns on the walls where guns are illegal in Japan, something like that, you know, I'm sure you could come up with some kind of exception. Obviously, you wouldn't have murder mysteries in Japan if there wasn't an occasional murder. And so some of my author friends would be out of business. It was completely inconceivable. But I believe it is still fairly far-fetched and unlikely to happen. We do have the reminder at the bottom of the list that at the bottom of the screen that you can sign up for the Okashikan mailing list. For those of you who came in late, please remember that our schedule is going to be changed over the next 2 months. So because we're having a very big event on July 17th, please mark your calendars. If you came for our New Year's event and had a good time, it is going to be even bigger with more guests. July 17th is going to be afternoon into evening. We're going to have more Japanese guests, more authors, more food, more everything, just a little bit of all of the above that we had last time. I'm going to be trying to bring in some new guests, and some fan favorites will be coming back. But because that is such a big show, I will not be doing so many shows in June and July as I'm preparing for that. So we will have Make Your Monday coming up on the 14th of June. That is actually a video that I recorded previously for another channel. It's going to be on Kawaii Bento. So I will be here in the comments, but you know, I'm not going to be doing it live, especially with food. It gets kind of messy. And that will be the only show that I'm personally hosting in July. The Demo Disc Akashikon show will also be running, but everything else is kind of pared back for June and July. And then all of our regular shows will be starting up again in August. So do keep an eye on that newsletter. We will be telling you what's coming up at the beginning of each month so that you can be prepared. But certainly, yes, thank you, Steph. Thank you, Lester. I hope that has answered your questions about what's coming up here. I see that we are coming up on almost 2 hours. Did not expect that. If you have any other questions, just drop me a line in email. I have not planned out the programming for this particular show for most of the rest of the year. I do have 1 or 2 more guests coming up, but I am happy to do a program on any topic that is within my sphere of information. So if there's something that you would really like to know more about, or a location that you would like to know more about, let me know. We absolutely have other people that I can now tap into as guests. So if there's a subject that I just don't know, but I know someone who does, I can try to get them on there. But thank you very much for being with us this Sunday afternoon. Remember, if you missed the earlier part of the broadcast with Rob of The Real Japan, you can watch the replay either on Twitch, which will be up immediately. There was a little video glitch though, so be careful. And the corrected video will be up on YouTube and on the okashikon.com website probably by tomorrow. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to play out with just a little bit more information about Rob's books. Remember that we did have the links in the show, but the links on the show notes on the website. We can get a small affiliate commission for those of you in the Akashikon community to help support Akashikon Online and the software that we use for this channel. Although the software does glitch a little, but thank you for being with us. We really appreciate you, and stay in touch if you have any questions, comments, or definitely mark your calendars for July 17th. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, this is Raphael Coronelli, writer of a bunch of stuff. But last year, I spent nearly a month traveling through northern Japan, from Hokkaido south to Tokyo. This year, for obvious reasons, I didn't have a chance to go back, so I wrote a book about the experience called How to Have an Adventure in Northern Japan. It's sort of a memoir, sort of a guide, but really the goal was to create something that could help people who can't travel to Japan right now feel like they are, and maybe plan for when things are safer again and we can go back. The response to the book has been great, and one of my favorite things I'm hearing is exactly what I'd hoped, that through my stories and photography, people are able to transport themselves into the north of Japan at a time when, unfortunately, we can't travel. I'm feeling optimistic about the new year, and I hope that wherever you are, you're staying safe and getting ready for when we can all travel and have fun in Japan again. Let's make it a great 2021, and I hope that my book, How to Have an Adventure in Northern Japan, can help you get there. Wherever you are in the world, akemashite omedetou gozaimasu.